One might have reasonably expected that when Congress passed, with near unanimity, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, legislation signed into law by the very president who spent months attempting to scuttle it, the American public would receive something approximating transparency. Instead, what the Department of Justice delivered on December 19th was a masterclass in the art of bureaucratic obfuscation, thousands of pages in which the text had been replaced by the absence of text, hundreds of documents so thoroughly blacked out that they resembled nothing so much as a confession written in the language of cowardice. Consider the mathematics of this contemptuous exercise. Over 550 pages rendered completely illegible, 119 pages of grand jury testimony from New York, a document presumably containing the most substantive material about how a known pedophile managed to evade serious federal prosecution for decades, transformed into a solid rectangle of black. 255 consecutive pages of evidence, testimony, or God knows what, converted into what can only be described as the visual manifestation of a cover-up in progress. The Department of Justice, in its infinite wisdom, apparently believes the American public is too fragile to handle the truth about how Jeffrey Epstein cultivated his garden of powerful friends who, for reasons that remain suspiciously obscure, still require protection from the embarrassment of association. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, a man whose previous occupation was serving as Donald Trump's personal defense attorney, a fact that should give pause to anyone with functioning critical faculties, has offered the predictable defense that every redaction serves the noble purpose of protecting victims. This explanation would be more convincing if it didn't fall apart upon the slightest examination. When photographs containing images of Trump mysteriously vanished from the department's website mere hours after their publication, only to be restored following public outcry, Blanche offered the risible explanation that the Southern District of New York had flagged the image for potential further action to protect victims. The victims in this formulation apparently required protection from a photograph showing Trump's image alongside Epstein's effects. One wonders what species of victim advocacy demands the temporary disappearance of evidence implicating the current President of the United States. The law that compelled this release, the same law Trump ultimately signed after being dragged kicking and screaming by members of his own party, explicitly forbids the government from withholding records due to the risk of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. The statute might as well have been printed on toilet paper for all the respect the administration has shown it. Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky who co-sponsored the legislation, has accused the administration of failing to comply with both the spirit and the letter of the law. Representative Ro Khanna, his Democratic counterpart in this bipartisan effort, has raised the specter of impeachment or prosecution referrals. When legislators from both parties are united in denouncing an administration's handling of a legal mandate, one begins to suspect that something other than victim protection motivates the army of redactors. The survivors themselves, the actual victims whose interests the department claims to champion, have not been fooled. Marina Lacerda, who testified that Epstein abused her when she was 14 years old, characterized the release as another slap in the face. "All of us are infuriated by this," she told reporters. Another survivor, Marika Chartouni, posed the rather obvious question, if everything is redacted, where is the transparency? The women who suffered at Epstein's hands have spent years waiting for accountability, only to receive a document dump composed largely of black rectangles and irrelevant photographs. The government's message to them could not be clearer. Your trauma is less important than protecting the reputations of the powerful men who moved through Epstein's orbit. And what of those powerful men? The files that have emerged beneath their patina of black ink show images of Bill Clinton swimming with Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted sex trafficker who served as Epstein's principal accomplice. They show Prince Andrew draped across the laps of women whose faces have been obscured. They contain phone logs, flight manifests, and the detritus of a vast criminal enterprise that operated for decades with something approaching impunity. What they do not contain, or rather what remains hidden beneath the redactions, is precisely the information that would explain how this was possible. The memo that accompanied a 2007 draft indictment of Epstein, a document that Massie and Khanna explicitly designed their legislation to capture, was not included in the release. The internal communications documenting how prosecutors made their decisions remain concealed under claims of privilege. A leaked Republican memo that circulated through Congress this month provides a helpful window into the party's strategy for managing this debacle. The document instructs members to dismiss any damaging revelations about Trump as a politically motivated hoax and to redirect attention toward Democrats, specifically Representatives Stacey Plaskett and Suhas Subramaniam and Ruwa Roman, none of whom enjoyed anything resembling Trump's decades-long personal and business relationship with the deceased sex trafficker. The memo deploys the classic strategy of DAVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. What it notably fails to do is dispute the accuracy of any information contained in the files themselves. Let us be clear about what we know regarding Trump's relationship with Epstein, since the president's defenders seem determined to pretend otherwise. The two men were photographed together repeatedly over many years. Trump once told New York Magazine that Epstein was a terrific guy who likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Epstein had numerous contact numbers for Trump in his personal directory, along with listings for Ivana and Ivanka Trump. A photograph in the newly released files shows Epstein holding a novelty check bearing Trump's signature, framed with the caption, "Once in a blue moon." An email from Epstein to Maxwell in 2011 noted that dog that hasn't barked is Trump, and claimed that Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers, who died by suicide this year at 41, had spent hours at my house with him. For the former president, it seems the barking has finally commenced. The political dynamics here would be amusing if they weren't so infuriating. Trump spent months attempting to prevent this release, going so far as to direct House Republicans not to sign the discharge petition that would force a vote on the matter. When Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, broke ranks to support transparency, Trump was, in her words, furious. He said it was going to hurt people, Greene recounted. The president branded her Marjorie Taylor Greene and withdrew his endorsement. She has since announced her resignation from Congress, citing death threats that she attributes to Trump's public attacks. The president's response to her safety concerns was characteristically empathetic. "I don't think her life is in danger. Frankly, I don't think anybody cares about her." The hypocrisy on display requires a moment of sustained contemplation. For years, Trump and his allies cultivated the QAnon movement, a sprawling conspiracy theory whose central premise is that a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles controls the government and that Trump was divinely appointed to expose them. The movement operated under slogans like "Save the Children" and portrayed Trump as a crusader against elite child traffickers. His allies, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, promised repeatedly that the Epstein files would be released and the truth revealed. Attorney General Bondi distributed binders labeled "The Epstein Files Phase 1" to social media influencers earlier this year. The implication was always that the files would expose Democrats while exonerating Trump. Instead, what has emerged is evidence of Trump's intimate decades-long association with the most notorious pedophile of the modern era, accompanied by a frantic effort to bury that evidence under black ink. The man who was supposed to storm the gates and expose the pedophile elite turns out to have been at the parties. The savior was a regular at the predator's dinner table. One might expect this revelation to prompt some soul-searching among Trump's supporters, particularly those who were drawn to him through appeals to child protection. One would be wrong. The same mental architecture that allowed believers to dismiss every previous failure of QAnon's predictions, the storm that never arrived, the mass arrests that never occurred, the great awakening that never dawned, permits them now to rationalize this contradiction. Some blame the deep state for thwarting Trump's noble intentions. Others insist the delay is strategic, another dimension of the plan. The capacity for self-deception, it seems, is bottomless. For those of us who have not surrendered our critical faculties, the picture is somewhat clearer. The President of the United States is using the power of the Justice Department to conceal information about his relationship with a convicted sex trafficker. The law mandating transparency is being flouted. The victims are being ignored, and the party that styles itself as the defender of children has closed ranks to protect a man whose friendship with Jeffrey Epstein spanned decades and whose efforts to prevent the release of these files bordered on the frantic. The shamelessness of it is almost admirable in its brazenness. Trump calls the Epstein matter a Democrat hoax, despite the fact that Epstein was his friend, not Bill Clinton's, or rather, in addition to Bill Clinton's. He dismisses calls for transparency as the work of troublemakers and radical left lunatics, while his own Department of Justice transforms legally mandated disclosures into a monument to redaction. He expresses confidence that his base will forget about the whole matter while his appointees labor to ensure there is nothing left to remember. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was characteristically understated when he observed that simply releasing a mountain of blacked-out pages violates the spirit of transparency and the letter of the law. Representative Jamie Raskin was more direct, accusing the administration of covering up things that, for whatever reason, Donald Trump doesn't want to go public, either about himself, other members of his family, friends, Jeffrey Epstein, or just the social business cultural network that he was involved in for at least a decade, if not longer. There will be more releases in the coming weeks, we are told. More documents will emerge from the department's vaults, presumably bearing additional black rectangles where the truth once resided. The administration will continue to claim that every redaction serves the interests of victims, while the actual victims continue to express their fury at being silenced once again. And Trump's supporters will continue to believe that their champion is secretly fighting the pedophile elite, evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. The whole sorry spectacle illuminates a truth about American politics that we would prefer not to acknowledge. Accountability is for the powerless. Jeffrey Epstein avoided serious federal prosecution for years because he was rich and connected. His victims were ignored because they were young and vulnerable. And now, even in death, his network of powerful friends continues to enjoy the protection of the very institutions that should be exposing them. The black ink tells its own story. Each redacted page is a decision, a choice made by someone with the authority to reveal or conceal. When hundreds of pages emerge as solid rectangles of black, that is not an accident of process. It is a statement of priorities. The Department of Justice has examined the evidence and concluded that whatever lies beneath those redactions is more dangerous to the powerful than it is useful to the public. We are left with the question that Marjorie Taylor Greene posed before her excommunication from the MAGA faithful: why fight this so hard? She claims not to know what is in the files. Neither really do we. But the intensity of the effort to keep that information hidden suggests that those who do know are very, very afraid of what would happen if the rest of us found out. The children who were trafficked through Epstein's operation deserved better than this. The survivors who testified, who went public with their trauma, who fought for years for some measure of justice, they deserved better than 550 pages of black rectangles. The American public, which was promised transparency by legislators of both parties and by a president who signed the very law now being flouted, deserves better than the insulting theater of concealment masquerading as compliance. Instead, we have received a masterwork of cowardice, thousands of pages in which the truth has been replaced by its absence, testimony transformed into silence, evidence converted into the visual representation of a cover-up in progress. When the history of this sordid episode is written, the black ink will tell the story that the Department of Justice refused to tell. And the question of what and whom that ink was meant to protect will hang in the air, unanswered and unanswerable, a monument to the corruption of power and the protection of the protected. Those who continue to support this administration while claiming to oppose human trafficking and protect children have surrendered any pretense of intellectual coherence. You cannot simultaneously venerate a man as the scourge of elite pedophiles while defending his frantic efforts to conceal his decades-long friendship with the most infamous pedophile of our time. You cannot claim to champion victims while excusing an administration that ignores their pleas for transparency. You cannot pretend to care about children while providing political cover for the burial of evidence that might explain how their abuser operated with impunity for so long. But consistency was never the point. The point was power, the acquisition of it, the maintenance of it, and the deployment of it to protect those who possess it from the consequences of their associations. In this, at least, the redacted files have achieved their purpose admirably. The truth remains hidden, the powerful remain protected, and the victims remain, as they have always been, an afterthought, their suffering less important than the reputations of men who preferred not to be embarrassed. One had hoped, perhaps naively, that the machinery of democracy might force a different outcome. Congress passed a law, the president signed it. The Department of Justice was mandated to release the files, and yet here we are, sifting through black rectangles and disappeared photographs, watching as the law is transformed into a suggestion and transparency into a performance. The files we were promised would tell us the truth. Instead, they have told us something else entirely. that in America there are some truths too dangerous to speak, and some men too powerful to expose. The black ink has spoken. It has said everything we needed to know.